The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by SparkLab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about SparkLab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by The Spinoff with help from Callaghan Innovation, New Zealand's innovation agency. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
When you think about the companies bringing autonomous vehicles to the roads, you probably think of some of the world's biggest names: Apple, Google, Tesla, Uber. But what if I was to tell you there was a kiwi startup that grew from repairing computers and making intelligent signage to inking multi-million-dollar international deals for autonomous shuttles? Ohmio is the maker of a 20-person shuttle that can be extended to carry up to 40. Their breakthrough is to operate on predetermined routes without the need for a driver. It's kind of like a tram, but with virtual rails guided by electronic systems. They're working with bus operators, new cities built for the autonomous future, and have got manufacturing happening in their own facility in China, with a new focus on expanding the AI capabilities and their research. To chat the journey, where they are now and where they go next, Research and Development Coordinator Mahmood Hikmet joins us now. G'day. Thanks so much for being here.
Nice to meet you, Simon.
Hey, so tell me, how did your company, your family company, get to be involved in autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, it is a bit from left field. So we started off. Depends how far back you want to go in the story. Very, very originally, we started off as a computer repair shop. When my father and uncle immigrated here from the Middle East. So that was in mid to end of the 90s. And they started up this computer business to sort of bring an income to the family, but then ended up getting specialized in electronic signage. As the years went by, they specialized more in road infrastructure. So signs that you see on the side of the road, mainly because it's a higher barrier of entry. I mean, if you need to produce something for the road that needs to fit to certain standards, sort of like the school zone signs or estimated minutes for your motorway, those ones we've all seen. There's a higher barrier of entry to get into that than to sell sort of a sign in a shop window, which anyone can sort of import and end up selling. So as the years went by, we got more and more experienced in that, and we've carved out quite a niche. Until we started adding more sensor technology, so the sign started to become smarter, integrating more into the smart city infrastructure of the future. And around 2015, we started to think, all right, we're doing pretty well. We can keep selling electronic signs for a little while, but eventually the road system's going to change. So what place is HMI Technologies going to have going into the future? I mean, when you think of the future, you think of things like driverless cars, and our signs give information to people inside that are driving vehicles. So what use really is an electronic sign giving information to a car without a driver?
So the intelligent signs are about to come not so smart.
Well, yeah, it's not about the not so smart. It's more about they serve a need that may not exist going 20 years from now. And you see that with a whole lot of different technologies, like the home phone, for example. That's sort of going out of style. I don't know many people who have one anymore. But if you go back a certain amount of time, it was something very relevant and something that everyone should have.
And it would have been a great business installing them everywhere
Great.
once upon a time.
Exactly. But you'd be crazy to start a home phone company now without sort of going into VoIP and adding your own...
Or hoping for a vinyl-esque kind of resurgence.
If people...
analog
if there's a hipster resurgence.
How closely aligned was that work with what your father and uncle had done in their respective places in the Middle East?
Well, they good question. They started off in Iraq. Like, you go back a lot of this is well before I was born. So they had a computer shop there as well. They'd import computers and they'd set things up. They'd do services for them. So like formatting a hard drive back then was something that took an entire day and was a service that people didn't know how to do. Then once they moved to Jordan because of the Gulf War in Iraq. And in Jordan, they set up a satellite positioning company. So they had they've always had a knack for electronics. So they set up this device which enables the satellite to change and be targeted as the satellite receiver, to change the dish and target it at different satellites so that you'd get many more channels. So that's where they came from.
And that's so cool that kind of background of innovation, and there's that great idea that people. There's a greater number of innovative companies started by immigrants because that same attitude of starting afresh, looking for new things is a talent of both an immigrant and an entrepreneur.
It's a very self-selecting population.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah. So when we thought about what's going to happen in the future with the science, we said, well, let's see how this infrastructure that we're setting up, we're an infrastructure company, how is it going to work with autonomous vehicles? So what will it take to bring an autonomous vehicle into New Zealand? So we set up this group of different companies and organisations. So we had us, Christchurch Airport, Christchurch City Council, NZTA, the Ministry of Transport, Canterbury University, basically a whole bunch of different stakeholders that were interested to see how to either legislate for autonomous vehicles, what it would mean business-wise for them, what research they can do on autonomous vehicles. For us, we wanted to see how do we integrate autonomous vehicles with our products. And so that's when we started the Christchurch Airport trial at the beginning of 2017.
And what were the kind of barriers here? Because when you do think about autonomous vehicles and getting them going, most of the companies and groups who are starting these projects and running these projects are very big and very well funded. And, from a successful but reasonably small in that scale company, what made you take the jump to go, actually, we could start making these?
Right, that's a good question. It's totally valid as well. It's like how are you going to compete against the Teslas and the Googles who've got more money and more funding, etc. than you?
More ins to government to get special regulatory allowances to test things.
That one's interesting because in New Zealand we're actually very good with links to government. So we've actually got pretty good relations and good accessibility to ministers and the different departments, etc. But as far as how do we exist in the same space as these other vehicles, is that we're not really in the same space. So when you look at something like Tesla or even the providers like Uber or Google, what they're wanting you to do is rather than own your own consumer vehicle, the vehicle that you currently have, they want you to take one of their ride services. They're looking to replace the consumer vehicle. That's a huge market to go into, like tens of billions of dollars to go after there, and that's a race that's constantly happening, and it's got its challenges.
Especially if they're not on predetermined routes as well. So rides that can go anywhere is maybe a very different kind of technical challenge to bite off than...
It's a huge problem, and it's a very difficult problem. And each of the companies have their own ways of solving it that are really, really interesting. What we're doing is, while they're going after this big race that is worth lots and lots of money, we've seen a smaller opportunity that for us is really, really big, but in the grand scheme of things isn't so big. And that's first and last mile transportation. So how do you get from your origin to sort of a bus depot or a train station? And how do you get from there to your destination? Or looking at places that are like airports or retirement villages that can have their own transport systems inside. So a big company isn't going to roll out sort of bespoke and custom services to those places. They're looking for the biggest, most general solution that can get them the most amount of money. And then once that race has run its course, that's when they'll start getting into these smaller markets. So we see that we've got a little bit of a head start here before the big players even start to look in this direction.
And so, talk me through, Mahmood, what that looks like. So in a airport, is that like when you're talking about shuttles, what does a shuttle look like, and how does it operate, and what kind of routes would it be going, like between Terminal A and Terminal B or something?
Yep. So between Terminal A and Terminal B, between parking and the airport. So if your parking doesn't need to be right next to the airport, what does that mean in terms of real estate for the airport? Since that's an airport has, it's not just a place to catch a plane, it's a whole sort of commercial center. So there's a lot more that an airport can do with that. Baggage, taking the baggage from the plane back to the airport itself. There's a lot of places autonomous vehicles can play a role, not just as passenger vehicles.
And what do yours look like, and how did you go to how did you get started in making them?
Good question. So as I said, we started this sort of almost symposium of stakeholders in the autonomous vehicle space, and we brought in an autonomous vehicle here and started a trial, and we wanted to integrate that vehicle. We wanted that vehicle to talk to one of our signs, essentially. So we approached the autonomous vehicle manufacturer and we said, how can you tell us how to interface with your vehicle?
Got an API, buddy?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I didn't want to use the word to know. Yeah, got an API. So we said, what is it? How do we integrate with the API, or how do we get inside your vehicle so that we can add this functionality? And they said, that's not what we do.
I guess if you're in a very regulated thing like autonomous vehicles, you don't want just anyone to be getting into the system and adding new features, do you?
Well, not like free, like sort of Wild West sort of style, but it was a flat no. There was no way we could add anything else. They said that they would need to develop that technology for us. And I don't see, or we as a company don't see that's not how the role of autonomous vehicles should be going into the future. They should be integrated into the larger ecosystem of transport, similar to a mobile phone. Sort of when you get your phone, the base functionality that you expect from that is to text and to call people. But most of the time that I use my phone, I'm not doing those things. I'm on social media, or I'm checking my bank balance, or what even new app is there. So the third-party integrations are what add value to this otherwise relatively open platform. And it's not whoever the smartphone manufacturer is that creates all of those apps. I mean, if they just limited it to them, you'd have the orders of magnitude less applications and functionality that you could do with this device. We see the autonomous vehicle in the same way. So the base functionality is that it follows a path and it doesn't hit people. That's what you expect as a baseline from the vehicles. But how does it integrate into this ticketing system for the city? If it's in an airport, can you do a check-in while on board? If the traffic laws are slightly different in one city, or you want slightly different operation, does the manufacturer need to get super involved in every step of the way? Or can you get some sort of buy-in for your platform from other people to integrate it to integrate your platform into their network in a way that makes more sense to them? So it's rather than we're trying to sell a product that we know works in a specific way, to we want to sell people the capability of having an autonomous vehicle work in the way that they expect it to work rather than the way that we expect it to work.
And so from not being able to just make the existing systems work with your signs, you thought, oh, well,
Market opportunity.
if we can't do theirs, let's do ours.
Exactly. So we saw that there's a real need for that, and that it came out of a sort of a source of frustration. But we saw it as a real opportunity. We had the technical know-how to do it, and we've demonstrated that.
And so from operating on a reasonably closed system, so predetermined routes, how does that make the kind of technical challenge of what you said, the baselines are, it goes the right path and it doesn't hit anyone.
Yeah.
How does that make that kind of more attainable? I imagine it's still a reasonably significant challenge.
Well, that does have a significant challenge. But again, there's that barrier to entry that makes business that makes it a good business decision. We've got a very good team of both AI engineers and electrical and mechanical and all sorts of different engineers working on these sorts of problems. A good way to think about our vehicles is like an autonomous tram that doesn't need infrastructure laid down in the ground. So rather than following a sort of a dugout path, we can do that through GPS.
And do you do it through an actual painted line, or is it simply GPS?
Because we're an open platform, we can add it to follow a painted line if you want to. We've got a whole bunch of different localization technologies, and I've got a talk on YouTube if anyone wants to listen to me go on about how we localize the vehicle.
I imagine the painted lines are more for the comfort of the users, the human users, than the needs of the platform.
That's another thing to consider is the human factors, like how will people interact with these autonomous vehicles going in? I see a very good parallel between them and elevators. Because if you think about it, an elevator is an autonomous vehicle. It only works in one dimension, up and down. But they were manned by people, by elevator operators at the turn of the century. But now they're completely autonomous. And when they flipped from being manned to being autonomous, people kind of freaked out a little bit. They were like, there's no one in the elevator. I guess the elevator's broken today. I'll take the stairs. But the people had to be eased into it. So they added the red button, which stops the elevator. They added a call button, which allows people to feel connected to the outside world. Elevator open and close buttons. Arguably, sometimes they don't do anything, but they make people feel better about their ride and gives them a more sense of control over it. As well as they had a soothing female voice tell them, "Hello, this is an automatic elevator. Please press the button for the floor that you want to go on."
And then in the case of your work, what are the elements that you're doing to help ease the journey for us distrustful, slightly evolved primates?
So to begin with, we need a personal approach, because the whole switching from not having any sort of interaction, from being able to control the vehicle, having someone that controls the vehicle, to not having that control is a big challenging step for a lot of people. So we have someone on board to talk them through it, explain a little bit about the vehicle. They're very curious. People, when riding an autonomous vehicle, are very curious about how it goes, but you'll be surprised at how regular and I guess almost mundane it gets. It's like, think of like when you're riding a train with a lot of carriages in it, you get into a compartment, you don't see the driver. For all you know, the train could be autonomous. In some cases, like in Denmark, they've got autonomous trams there. It feels normal. It feels like a regular commute. It's just the first time that you do it, it's a little bit unnerving.
Yeah.
But it gets boring pretty quickly.
Yeah. Like the link that's often drawn is it'll be as weird to say driverless car in the future as it is to say horseless carriage.
Horseless carriage or operatorless elevator.
Yeah.
So it's like if there's a guy in the elevator now, it's like, I need to stand next to someone for a little bit.
Yeah. And people at the moment with things like Uber rides where they just get in, don't talk to the driver, look at the phone. It may as well be a robot the way that most people interact with other humans.
Yep, and Uber is certainly working their way towards making that a reality.
And so where have you got these in operation at the moment? And what's because it's grown from New Zealand, but obviously the big markets are elsewhere, and the opportunities are elsewhere, aren't they? Where infrastructure is being built to create these autonomous cities of the future where this kind of technology fits.
Exactly. So New Zealand is obviously a market for us, but we'd be crazy just to be targeting New Zealand and nowhere else in the world. This technology is applicable almost anywhere. So the first partner that we've got in New Zealand is Christchurch Airport. So we're working very closely with them, and that's where our first vehicle will be going. Our first commercially produced vehicle will be going to. We've produced other vehicles in the past. So in September of 2017, we launched our Ohmio Hops, which are small 4-person shuttles, basically showcasing our technology and our capability of being able to build a vehicle. We did that down in Christchurch.
And how do you showcase that? Do you do kind of like dodgems that don't dodge them?
It's a circuit. It was a circuit outside the Christchurch Art Gallery. Great space down there. But we opened it to the public and had people hop on board as needed.
Like a teacups ride.
Yeah, kind of, without the spinning or the nausea. Yeah. But we had the vehicles go out onto the road, stop at the traffic light if someone was crossing the road, and then come back. Yeah, but they were small 4-person vehicles. They were there to showcase what our technology was.
And so starting in Christchurch, but then overseas, like Korea, I saw a thing about what's happening potentially happening in Korea, where they're actually building a city infrastructure for the future.
Yeah, so that city won't allow any diesel-fueled vehicles inside. So they've got a classification for a city called a smart city, and they want to showcase technology there. One of the technologies is autonomous vehicles. So we've signed a MOU, an agreement to supply 150 autonomous vehicles to Korean city once it gets set up.
And how does that go from kind of, starting out with a little pilot in New Zealand to then having these discussions and signing these MOUs for, very significant international things very, very quickly?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got a good international network. So one of the things that we try to do is attend international standardization meetings. So how do, for ISO, for example, how do we standardize new technologies that are coming out? So we play a part in that because those standards end up affecting our business at the end of the day. So through that, we're able to make connections on an international scale. And we work with ITS New Zealand, which is the company representing intelligent transportation systems in New Zealand, and Mahmood Hikmet, my father and the chairman of the company. He's the president of ITS New Zealand. And so through that role, he's able to get a lot of international connections and sort of talk about how he sees the future.
And with all of this R&D, very heavy R&D, and also the kind of like international expo of New Zealand technology kind of side of things, what role do organisations like Callaghan and government organisations play in this?
A very important one. So Callaghan have been fantastic with us as far as a supportive partner. So they've got schemes that incentivize R&D, but as well as also being a bit of a strategic partner as well and working alongside them on some projects. So that's been really good. We've been working alongside NZTE as well, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. They've been very, very supportive in telling us how to, and sort of guiding us through the process of becoming a very big international business. And they've been very, very supportive. And of course, NZTA, Christchurch City Council, a whole bunch of city council. It's not just one or two organisations, but New Zealand as a whole is very, very good with enabling this sort of technology.
That's one of the reasons that quite a few autonomous makers, like the autonomous flying vehicles, are also in the space because of a good regulatory environment, isn't it? But other countries are further along in terms of getting the vehicles on the road, isn't it? Isn't that the case? Which is why China becomes the space for the first manufacturing facility.
So China as a manufacturing facility makes sense, as manufacturing is what China does best. But we think that New Zealand also has a large role to play in these sorts of systems. So not in terms of manufacturing, really. That's not really our strength, mass manufacture of vehicles. But we have a whole lot of expertise here. We haven't had to import any of our AI team, for example. We've been able to hire all from within New Zealand. Coincidentally, everyone's an immigrant, but that's the role that's how New Zealand is, really. But New Zealand has a large part to play in terms of R&D and creating the systems. But as manufacturing goes, I don't see that as high on the list.
And it's quite a quick process, isn't it? So from kicking off, 2017, is that right? With the first kind of trying to get the sign working with the vehicle, to then having a manufacturing plant, $20 million manufacturing plant in China going in.
Yep. So that's a pretty big jump, but that shows how keen they are to bring about those sorts of jobs to China. It's not in any way taking away from what we're doing in New Zealand. No, it's going to help us grow a lot more in New Zealand as well, and it'll enable us to grow worldwide.
And so what stage is that growth, and what's happening next?
So we're just in the final stages of dotting the I's and crossing the T's on the contracts with China. That's a sort of it's a large setup where you've got a few government organizations or public organizations joining together in a joint venture with us to set up a plant there. So we're working closely with them.
And that excitement from their side, is that because of the possibilities of what they see that being able to do in cities there?
Yep, they don't want to fall behind, so they invest quite a bit in going fast towards the future.
What an absolutely remarkable journey to be on as well in such a short period of time. Like, what kind of advice do you give to people who are wanting to kind of do things that make things happen that may seem outside of the bounds of what you can do from New Zealand?
Well, I don't think it seems outside the bounds. I mean, New Zealanders have been traditionally very good at sort of rolling their sleeves up and getting on with it. We saw what our company will be like in the future, and we saw what the city is going to be, and we saw that our product as they are would not exist going into the future. So it was sort of a survival instinct to invest this heavily in R&D. We couldn't afford not to do it. Otherwise, it would be something quite a short-sighted decision to just continue on as usual. New Zealand's a fantastic place to find a lot of very intelligent people that are very resourceful, very productive, and are more. You'll be surprised at sort of the level of expertise of New Zealanders and Kiwis. I'm very proud of being a New Zealander, and I absolutely love coming across people that are so far along in the technical space here.
Did people tell you were crazy to try it?
Well, yeah, of course. Of course. Like, if you told me 3 years ago that I'd be sitting talking about how our company started to build autonomous vehicles, that'd be a bit nuts. But that's sort of what technology does. It's a very fast-moving industry, and we're seeing technology start to enter more and more spaces, and with that comes a lot of disruption. So if you don't change, then the change is going to happen around you, and you'll be playing catch-up for a long time. And that's not a good position to be in.
And if people listening are excited by the idea of these vehicles and want to see more and learn more, how can people get involved?
Well, you can visit our website, ohmio.com or ohmio.co.nz. That's OHMIO. That's HMI with 2 wheels on either side, so it's a little bit...
And HMI is your parent company?
Yes. So we spun out from HMI Technologies. So Ohmio is HMI with wheels. Some guy was paid way too much to think of that.
I think that's really cute. And then Christchurch in the not too distant future, there'll be vehicles in action.
Yep. Also other places around New Zealand which I can't talk about just yet. But yeah, they'll be popping up. They'll be popping up in quite a few places. If you'd like to learn more about them, reach out and we'll get in touch.
Yeah, and if you do happen to be an AI researcher or someone involved in machine learning, maybe get in touch as well, isn't it? It's a massive job.
Yeah, it's a massive job, but there's actually a lot of jobs in AI in New Zealand. It's a great time to be an AI engineer or data scientist or machine learning specialist or deep learning. It's just such a wide field, and there's a huge demand for it.
Yeah, it's humming. Hey, so thank you so much for joining us, Mahmood Hikmet.
Cheers, Simon.
And thank you very much, Tina Tiller, for producing, and thank you very much for having us along and listening.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound. And brought to you by the Spinoff and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spinoff Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tamaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spinoff Podcast Network.